I'm Forrest Shull, Editor-in-Chief of IEEE Software, and our special issue this time around is on the reflective practitioner. And I didn't think such a special issue would be complete without talking with someone about retrospectives, which to my mind is one of the most compelling ways, the most practical ways that teams these days are learning from their own experiences, reflecting on what's going on, and trying to do better the next time. So I'm here today talking with Linda Rising, an independent consultant who's internationally well known for her work on agile practices, on change processes in organizations, and for retrospectives. So thank you for joining me, Linda.
Thank you for thinking of me, Forrest.
So one of the things I was going to start off by saying was I managed to get interested in retrospectives in the first place largely because of you, actually, and the work that you've helped us with at the magazine and doing retrospectives for our annual meetings. How did you get interested in retrospectives in the first place?
Well, there's a little story I tell, and I'll try to remove all of the specific references so we won't get in trouble. But I was working at a medium-sized telecom company, and my job as part of a little sort of support or research organization was to help teams work with patterns. And at that time, we had the Gang of Four book and some other books that had to do with architecture and design, mostly technical things. Mm-hmm. And in the company, there was a very large project that kept growing and growing. More money was being invested. And finally, after almost 2 years, the project was canceled. And it was an enormous failure, very expensive. And my boss came to me and he said, I know that you're working on these pattern things, and I know they have to do with architecture, design, technical things, but surely there are patterns for how you run projects, how teams do whatever it is that they do. There must be these other kinds of things that could be documented as patterns. And what we want to do is make sure that we get a hold of some of those so we don't see this kind of massive failure again. So can you find some? And I said, well, I don't know anything about that, but I have a good friend who's writing a book about something called retrospectives, and that was Norm Kurth. Mm-hmm. He wrote probably the classic book on retrospectives. It's called Project Retrospectives. And he was a good friend of mine because he was a member of the Patterns community. And I thought, if anybody knows about how you make sense out of what projects are doing and whether there are patterns there, it would be Norm. And so I contacted him, and he said, oh, yes, Linda, this is a great chance for you. He said, you should do a retrospective. And I said, well, Norm, I don't have any idea what that is or how would I do that. And so he did a great job of holding my hand and guiding me through the retrospective wilderness, gave me some ideas for exercises. He sent me early copies of the book so that I could get some background on what was going to happen and why. And in going through that initial retrospective, I learned an enormous amount. I mean, for a first retrospective, it was very informative that really helped me in the way I see teams and retrospectives and patterns and what people can learn from their own experience. So it was a life-changing event, that's for sure. But that was my first experience with it. And I'd done companies that I'd worked with had done things called postmortems, and where everyone got together in a room, you made some document. Usually there was a format or a template that you had to fill out. But once that was done, nobody ever did anything with it. It was just kind of the closing formality, the last check on the list of things that projects had to do. But nobody ever in a succeeding project went back, looked at that list, and said, now what can we in this project learn from that other project, even if it was a different domain, different people, at a different time, different environment? Could we possibly have any valuable lessons learned there? Nobody ever did that. So the idea that this is all about learning, not just checking off a box, was a totally new way of looking at the whole experience for me, and the exercises. It wasn't just a meeting. We had to have some exercises to help us go back and look at what had happened. That was also new, and I struggled with that for a long time because I'm more of a technical person, and having to look at all of these other touchy-feely, oh my goodness, we might talk about how we felt during the project. That was really difficult for me, and I was lucky not only to find Norm, but lots of other mentors along the way who really helped me get better at that.
And since you bring up postmortems, it's funny to me that I've kind of had these two concepts sitting side by side in my head all these years, and I think of them as completely different. They don't belong in the same domain. But of course, I think at least at heart, they have very similar goals. So if we have some listeners that are familiar with postmortems, is there an easy way to characterize the difference between a postmortem and a retrospective?
Oh, I think so, yes, because when I have a little time to give a presentation about what our retrospective is and what can we learn by following the ritual, I always start by saying, is this the same as a postmortem? And of course, the first thing we do is, well, let's examine that. What is postmortem? And it's something that happens after death. It's Latin for after death. And it comes from the medical area that there was an autopsy performed on bodies after death, with the idea of trying to say, well, what was it that caused the death of this person? And yes, of course, we want to try to learn from it if we can. But unfortunately, there isn't anything that you can possibly learn from a postmortem or an autopsy that can help the dead person. It's done. It's over. And that idea was transferred to projects. The project is dead. The project is over. And so there isn't anything that we can do to learn from the experience of doing the postmortem that could possibly help the project because it's finished. And in a retrospective, the idea is more like if we're going to stick with a medical analogy, we were going to say it's more like a checkup. You're going to sit down with your physician and say, I've been having some chest pains, and the doctor will say, well, you need to lose weight. How about starting some exercises? And let's think about ways of improving your life so that you don't have to rush into the postmortem experience. It's about learning. It's about stopping and thinking about what you're doing. And that idea then transfers well to a project that let's take a moment and stop and think about what we're doing, with the idea that maybe we need some more vitamins, maybe we need to do a little exercise, maybe we need to learn about how things are going while we can still do something about it. Let's not just wait until, well, it's over, that's too much for us, and let's move on to the next.
Great. And that, I think that's a perfect way of saying it, that idea of kind of stopping and thinking about what you're doing. And it immediately kind of begs the question of, do you think that in your experience working with teams, are people more receptive to doing that? I think anything where I have to stop productive work and kind of step back and take a reflection, to my mind, has always been a hard sell because people are under so much time pressure. Have you seen that changing over time? Or do you think it's a more easy sell these days?
Well, I try to make some sports analogies. Most of the time I'm working with teams of younger guys, and they can understand the difference in the behavior of a sports team when you have a little huddle in the middle of the game, and the coach might come out and say, look, guys, here's how we're doing, and I think maybe we need to adjust our game plan. We were trying to use this set of plays, and that's not working. because the other team is trying to do some things that are a little different from what we anticipated. And so on the fly, they have to do a little bit of replanning. They don't have time for an enormous meeting where they lay out a huge, complicated game plan, but they do have time for some little tiny tweaks in the way things are going that are based on what they've seen so far. And it's really a very agile approach to say, we don't have time to map out a huge strategy, but we do have time just to make some little tweaks based on what we have learned from our experience in the game so far. And they all seem to buy into that. And say, yeah, we can see that. That if we just take a moment and make some adjustments, we're not talking about huge upheaval here, just make some small adjustments as we go along that, yeah, we could sort of, it's like driving a car. You go down the road and you have to turn that wheel a little bit. Otherwise, you're going to run into a tree. You have to adjust. So they buy into that as long as it doesn't take a long time and as long as something real happens. It can't just be a meeting. It can't just be, well, let's sit and discuss this interminably. Let's make some little tiny adjustments and then go forward, and then we'll do another little huddle and we'll see, well, how are things going when we might make a couple of more adjustments. But those are real. Those are real adjustments. Those are real tactics. And when people can see that there's a real change that comes out of it, then they'll buy into it. If it's just a meeting where people sit and endlessly discuss and nothing real happens, all people do is finger pointing, blaming, saying, well, we don't have any power, the customers are doing this, management is doing that, and all it leads to a sense of increasing helplessness and hopelessness, then it gets nowhere. So it has to be proactive, it has to be specific, there have to be targeted actions, but not too big. Just little tiny things that are within our locus of control. Yes, we know we can do this. Yes, we know we'll make it happen. And then we'll see how it goes and we'll learn. And then we'll get together again in another month or month and a half and we'll tweak a few more things. So it's a very agile attitude. I think Retrospectives kind of brought that to the table initially of stop during the course of the project. Don't make it a big deal and find some little things that you can do just like the basketball team or the football team or, so that kind of analogy makes it more real for people and they see the reason for it.
So I know in your work you've done a lot of helping teams kind of get introduced introduce retrospectives maybe for the first time in some cases. And as you work with the teams as a facilitator, do you get a sense of whether they're really getting it? I mean, can you tell when it's a real learning opportunity versus when it's just we're going through the motions and we're going to come up with some action items and then we're going to be happy we got out of that meeting room?
Oh, yeah, because in the teams I work with, which are now mostly some flavor of agile, the idea is that you don't come into a room for a meeting where you're going to sit and brainstorm. We're moving more toward continuous retrospectives. Everything is continuous now, continuous delivery, for instance. So retrospectives need to match that. So what we're moving toward now is not the idea that every 4 weeks or 6 weeks we sit down for an hour and a half and come up with some action plans. No, what we're doing is we have it sort of going on in the backs of our minds all the time. And we do that with an ongoing timeline. I think maybe in the board meeting we did a couple of timelines. I can't remember. But it's basically a big board that's divided up into chunks of a day. And then as events happen, people post cards on that timeline reflecting the event and how they felt about it. And people see that all the time. they go by and read it, and they notice when new cards are posted. And it does a couple of things. It gets the idea out, the feeling out, the event out, and other people notice it. They can share it. They can talk about it. But it also starts everyone thinking about, well, what can we do differently to address the problem that this event calls to our attention? And we'll just mull that over. We were going to talk about the brain today, and one of the things that we know is that your brain has levels of processing, and you can tuck things away for sort of like the meeting when we're going to talk about it. Don't even think about it. Just let it grind away there subconsciously, so that when the meeting actually happens, people have been cranking away and thinking about ideas maybe for the entire iteration. So for 6 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it is, they've been working on it. So when they come in, the start of the meeting is like, hey, how about this? I've been thinking about that problem that we had with the customer, where they said they wanted the red box and now they changed their minds and it's going to be a green box. If we had done, and they'll have an idea for some little thing. So the excitement in a meeting like that is palpable. We had a metric, sort of an emotion meter or something, you could say people come in and they got an idea and they don't know whether it'll work or not. This is not a hard and fast, yes, this will work. This is an experiment. And so we're going to try this. And we'll try it for the next iteration, and we'll see how it works. And we're not going to do too many experiments, but just 1 or 2. So for me now, a retrospective is a time when we look back on the last iteration at the experiments we tried, and we say, what worked really well? What should we try differently this time? And what did we learn from those little experiments? And then we incorporate that into the planning for the next couple of experiments that we're going to do in the next iteration. So it's an ongoing process of thinking about the experiment. So it's not necessarily about identifying all the ways that we can improve. They're little tiny things. It is, what can we do? What little tweak can we make? And it always has to be within our locus of control. We can't hand this over to management or demand that the customer stop sending us change requests. No, we know that doesn't get us anywhere. It has to be something we can do, and it has to be something that will really, we hope, have a larger impact, will make a difference. So when you hand that responsibility and that sense of involvement over to people, they get excited. And they feel like, well, maybe I can do something about this. And you can pick that up. You can definitely feel that.
Does it correlate to a level of emotion or engagement, or is it just one of those things you can't describe? I'm kind of curious what the cues are that you look for.
Well, I think it's mostly that they show up on time for the meeting, and when they come in, they're already talking about it. And in fact, maybe they've already we've got a pattern in fearless change called corridor politics. They know they can only do a couple of things in each iteration, so they've already started talking to a couple other people on the team and lobbying in a way for their idea because they're kind of excited about it. They want to try it. And they know that there's not going to be room for an enormous number of experiments. So they've already started talking with a couple of people, and they come in and they're saying, hey, the 3 of us have been talking about this, and we think that maybe we could try this. And, they get the buzz going. And it's so different from, I guess I would say, an ordinary retrospective where people come in, got a lot of people are late, and then you say, okay, we're going to start brainstorming and think about what worked well and what should be done differently. And it just doesn't have any juice. It doesn't have any energy. It doesn't have any, and people are bored and they think, well, nothing's going to happen. Who cares? We're just wasting time here. Nobody listens to us anyway.
So, do you have any recommendations if you're a facilitator and you find yourself in one of those kind of downward spirals where there's not a lot of hope and there's not a lot of energy, and then of course the meeting just becomes a more painful thing? Do you have ways to kind of kick things out of that mode and maybe get things in a more positive direction?
Yeah, because there always has to be a first meeting. I mean, the idea is this is ongoing, this is continuous. There always has to be a first meeting. So in the first meeting, what we have to do is realize that as bad as things are, and usually that's all I see, are bad things. As bad as things are, there's always something. There's always some small thing. And what I try to impart to a group like that is to say, you don't know, perhaps, that very small things can have enormous impact. And it has enormous impact not just on the team or the organization, but it has impact on yourself. Because when you can see that your very small idea had a flavor of something that got you excited, that got the team excited, that moved your team forward a little bit, that fits into what chaos theory or complex adaptive systems theory tells us about the butterfly in South America who flaps his wings and makes a difference in a tornado that lands in Nashville. Everything's all hooked together. So really, there are no small things. Everything can have wide impact. And you don't know in the beginning. You have no idea whether your small idea is going to have enormous impact or whether it's going to lead to another small thing and another small thing. That will have wide impact. You don't know. So you have to keep coming up with little things. It doesn't have to be ginormous, just some little tweak. And that you get the rock rolling by just a small, okay, let me get over here and push on this side. And you get over there and push on that side. And at some point, we'll have the tipping point, and that rock will start rolling, and you don't know what's going to happen after that. So to give them the sense that they have more control over their environment, they have more of a say on what life is like than they realize if they will just start thinking of just little things. And that's true in their own lives as well. Just small things. That's the message of Fearless Change, really, is baby steps or small steps.
Great. Oh, I like that a lot.
And it's true. It's true. This is not just marketing hype. This is true. And that's the powerful thing about it is it's true and it works. And they know that. They know you're not just selling them stuff. They say, yeah, that's true. And then they begin to come up with it because, the benefit we have is that we get to work with incredibly smart, creative people who really care. They want to do a good job. And so it's really pretty easy to get them going. It's not that we have people with IQs of 50 who hate their jobs, who are doing dull, boring things. These people are doing exciting things. They really do have to innovate. They have a lot of challenges. That's why they love, most of them, they love what they do. So all we have to do is just kind of plug into that. It's a lot easier than it would be for people in some domains. Great.
Well, I was going to ask if you have experiences doing these things in safety-critical or mission-critical environments. I mean, a lot of the work I've done with NASA or DoD, for example, I think people feel more boxed in because there's more regulations, there's more constraints on the work they do. But I think that the message that you're giving is that there's still small changes within those parameters that are going to be things that they have control over, that the team can make a difference with. And then the nice thing about retrospectives is, of course, you pay attention to things over time and you see the results of those innovations and kind of get the chance to pick it out from the background noise for the first time sometimes.
Yeah, I know that in the beginning when we started doing Agile, the company I was working for in the mid-'90s, I thought, gosh, most of my experience at that time had been with big projects. I had worked on a DOD project. I'd worked on the 777 airplane. I worked with telecom, where anytime you have a certifying agency that is sitting in the background, coming to meetings periodically, I thought, Agile is just never going to make any inroads. And in the beginning, it was about small web-based Java kind of cool things, but it has changed. And when you go to the big Agile conferences now, you hear from government, you hear from all kinds of projects that are involved in either heavy documentation, certifying agency in the background, lots of CMMI level, whatever. All of a sudden there's a lot of interest from all of these other domains because they know they still have to carry the burden of all of that overhead, but they also know they can do it better. And that an Agile approach, to the extent that they can adopt it, will help make them better. So they're all moving in that direction. They're all trying to learn about when is it appropriate to do what practice and how can we learn about this. So the big ship is turning. There have been several crosstalk articles about DoD contracts that have Agile specified in them, little experiments with projects where they have tried to have more of an Agile approach with requirements gathering, not have to spend the enormous amount of time up front documenting every little thing. So it's definitely happened. And that's where it would begin, is in a retrospective, is what little thing, what small thing can we do, and that will have impact. And then, of course, it shouldn't just be about this team. You should do what you can to periodically get together with everybody else in the organization and to say, well, here's what we've tried. And what we find is that there's more commonality across projects than we realize. And that if we do get in the business of trying to share what we've learned with other teams, that they really are interested in that. They really do want to hear what your experiments were, because you're talking about little things that they could probably do. These are not massive upheaval kinds of things where they say, well, throw out everything you're doing now and let's do something totally new. No, it's just some small thing that really worked well.
So one of the things I've wondered about is what happens when you get into a kind of a dysfunctional environment where the retrospective, it becomes a chance to say, oh yes, we are put upon, the outside world doesn't get us, and they're not smart enough sometimes to see the good things that we're providing. I mean, when you have the same people doing the retrospective that are doing the work and perhaps missing the connections, how do you get people out of their comfort zone and maybe think about an outside perspective as part of these?
Well, if it's possible, of course, if you want to include a customer or the government or big pharma or whoever it is who's looking over your shoulder, is to have them be part of the team. And that would mean they would come to the retrospective as well. And you could ask them, well, what are some things that we could try? In fact, maybe we could even work together. So I have a story that I tell about a customer, and it was at the same telecom company. And that's actually what started us doing Agile, is the telecom industry was changing out from under us, and they came and said, well, we don't know what we're going to need, but we know we're going to need it by June. And I'm not making that up. And, of course, this team said, well, yeah, hey, we can do that. We can do that. Not knowing what it is. How could we even say that we could do that? And the answer is that the customer didn't know. The marketplace didn't know. We didn't know. But what we were going to do is we were going to bring that customer in and make that person a team member. And we were going to start by saying, okay, what shall we do in the next 4 weeks? Is there something that we're pretty sure is going to be part of this box? and that we're going to have it no matter what else goes on. And they said, well, of course, it's going to have this little green thing here. And we said, well, we can do that. So we'll do that in 4 weeks, and then we'll get together and we'll see what else we know, because in 4 weeks, everybody will have learned something about the marketplace, about how this little green box is going to work, about what the other people who are trying to do this, our competitors, what they're doing. We'll know a little more, and then we'll decide what's the next baby step. And when we got to the end, and we did deliver on time, by the way, the retrospective included comments from the customer. And what the customer said was, in the beginning, we didn't know anything, but we grew this together.
Mm-hmm.
And so involving all those externals, the customer, the representative from, I remember on the project we worked with the DOD, we had a guy from the Army who was there all the time, and we could just go up to him and say, hey, I'm kind of stuck on writing this little ADA module, and we're wondering, well, what do you think about that? And they were really happy to be involved with it, instead of waiting until a final delivery years down the road when we might have made a pretty serious mistake, and it'd be really hard to undo, is work with us.
Right. So it becomes a chance to learn together.
Absolutely. You grow together. And they should be part of the retrospectives. So they can come up with ideas about little tiny things that would just, some small thing that might help make things better. They'd be very good sources of little ideas for experiments.
Great. So is there one thing that you see people doing from time to time with retrospectives that you wish you could correct? I mean, are there kind of general anti-patterns out there that people tend to fall into, or get the process a little bit less sufficient than it could be sometimes?
Well, one of the problems we have is that we're stuck with our brains. Well, there's really nothing we can do about it. And our brains have an enormous list of defects. Mm. That's my argument with the creationists. They say, I think God could have done a better job. We have a lot of issues here that clearly we have, because at one time it meant survival. Mm-hmm. And now we're stuck with it. So our ancestors had it, and at the time it was good, but now it's not so good, and it gets in the way. And so whenever we all get together with the idea of learning and reflecting, we have to overcome it keeps growing. I keep thinking I can keep up with it, but I'm not sure I can. There's a huge list of cognitive biases that we all struggle with, and one of them is the confirmation bias, which says once you believe something, and we all do this, once you believe something, it's really hard to undo that, because we will actually filter out solid data, any kind of information that we read or that we hear from others. We'll actually filter that out, and we'll only keep the parts that reaffirm our belief. So it's hard.
I was going to say, I think that's one that we see on a day-to-day basis. I mean, for someone who collects data for a living and tries to make data-driven arguments, I think that's one that we come up against all the time.
Well, data is not convincing. Data is only reinforcing. When I see data that backs up what I believe, then I embrace it. When I see data that doesn't agree with what I believe, I discard it. And I will do that in any number of ways. I will say, oh, well, look at that study. It only had 12 people. What are they talking about? I'm not going to listen to that. Are you crazy? Or I'll find some way around it. I'll find some way of explaining it so that I don't have to pay any attention to that. And we not only do that as individuals, but then if the team really gets in the habit of seeing things a certain way, and groups of people can do this, then the whole team can develop a confirmation bias so that now they see the world a certain way, and they will only see what they want to back that up. And wow, that's really hard to overcome. Once they believe, for instance, that the marketing or the business guys, it's a very common confirmation bias for technical people to believe that business people are stupid. Those people just don't understand anything. There's a constant war between the technical side and the business or the marketing side because each side has its own confirmation bias. And if you go across that no man's land and you talk to people on the business side, they say incredible things about technical people. That, they are negative, they never want to go along with their ideas. So it exists on both sides, and it's very clear when you just sit down and talk to those people about what they say, and you can hear it in their vocabulary. Those people.
Yes. Those
people. And we all do that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I was going to say, so given that we're stuck with these horribly retro, out-of-date brains, how do you get people out of that mode? Is it enough to point out, look, you're doing the cognitive bias thing again here possibly? Is that an example where you bring those business people into the room and have them be part of the retrospective?
Yes, that's the only way around it, is to get rid of that us against them, to say this business guy he's one of us. And that means that business person has to have a trusting relationship with the team. So it should just be one person. It should be one person who knows how to listen. It should be one person who really knows how to communicate. And you're going to more likely find a business person like that than you are a technical person like that. So if you have a contact that you develop a trusting relationship with, then they can bring in that business side without beating all the technical guys over the heads with it. And after a while, if there is that nice trusting relationship that develops, then they kind of drop that, those people, because after all, our guy, he's one of those people, and he's okay. He's been helping us. He's willing to work with us, and he understands these deadlines and that we've had these struggles. And so somebody who really gets to know at a personal level what's going on over there. That's really the only way around it, is to get rid of those people. They don't understand us. And otherwise, we're stuck with that. Yeah. That's a nasty one. Confirmation bias is how we see the world. Yep.
Well, and I think that the scenario you were just describing, where I have the different stakeholders in the room together and try and understand their perspective, ties in a little bit with a discussion I saw online when I was researching this interview, where I think you had some comments as part of a discussion around the prime directive of retrospectives. And maybe if you recognize the discussion, maybe I should let you introduce the prime directive.
Okay. I'm trying to remember. I think I remember some of that discussion, and it's interesting because when I first read it, I thought came from Norm Kurth. I thought, well, Norm, okay, it's a nice idea, but I don't know whether I can sign up for it or not. The prime directive should start every retrospective, and it's basically the statement that regardless of what we discover in this meeting, we are going to say that we believe everybody who was involved was doing the best job he or she could. Now, of course, we know more now than we did 4 weeks ago when the iteration started. We've learned a lot. But given that, at the time, we knew what we knew, and we didn't have the benefit of the knowledge that we've accumulated now, given what we knew at the time, and of course we're better at doing the programming language, understanding the environment, talking to the customer, our skills and abilities have improved as well. So given what we knew at the time and our skills and abilities, so given where we were, we were all doing the best job we could. And that's kind of a little pledge that we take at the beginning. We're all going to say that we believe that everybody was doing the best job that he or she could. And that's such a struggle for everybody because we all know that we ourselves aren't always doing the best job we possibly could. We're tired, or we got other things on our minds, or we just don't have our hearts in it. There are a whole host of reasons why we know ourselves that we weren't doing the best job we could. So how can we possibly say that about everybody on the team? And I think that original discussion that you're talking about was from a lot of different people who saw that statement differently, and some people didn't like it, and some people thought it was wonderful. And but I don't remember the gist of the conversation, but I thought it was pretty good, because it's always good to hear from a diverse group of people about anything. If you're willing to be open, then you can learn. So, but here's how I see it now. I see it very differently. So there, a lot that I've been reading recently has to do with, this is another bias that we have in our brain, that when we expect something to happen, and it's an expectation bias, when we expect something to happen, we do pretty much everything, including how we view the end result, to make that true. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, this expectation bias. And one of the things that happens is that if every meeting somebody puts up that prime directive, and if we all say, oh, yeah, I remember that, it's that if we all do the blah, 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 yeah, okay, and that if just pretending, if we just pretend for the sake of the retrospective that that's true, then your brain hears that over and over at every retrospective. And after a while, it sets up the expectation that this is really true, that we really do believe that, that we do think that everybody was doing the best job that he or she could. And what that sets up is that then everybody does the best job that he or she could. There's a very famous article that was written for Harvard Business Review that I talk about all the time, and I can send it to you if you want, that says managers, when they hire people, before they ever have a chance to understand the level of performance they can expect from anybody, they have already made up their minds about whether this person is going to be good or not. And so I asked some managers, and I said, here's this research that shows managers have this expectation, and they don't even know these people, and is that true? I mean, do you find that as a manager? And so a friend of mine said, well, I guess we do. I guess maybe that, I have to think about that. But here's the interesting thing, Linda, is that we're always right. Well, of course they are. Of course they are. Because if they've already made up their minds that you're a good guy or you're not, then that's expectation bias, and they see it. So if they think you're good, then that's what they see. Everything you do is wonderful. And if you make some mistakes, well, they just ignore that. Whereas if they don't think that you're so good, every mistake becomes magnified. Any problem you have is something they remember. And so they do the same thing with confirmation bias. They filter out anything, and pretty soon and you feel that. As an employee of a manager who has made up his or her mind, you feel that.
That's right.
And after a while, your performance meets their expectations. So the manager has managed to create an employee that's great or an employee that's not so good, just by having those expectations. So if the manager can do that, I think we can all do that. We can all do that for each other. And so just by saying, yes, I believe the prime directive, just for the sake of the retrospective, I believe that, and saying it this time and the next time and the next time and the next time, that over some number, I don't know what it is, that we come to believe it. And when we believe it, then we extract that behavior from everybody on the team. We really do we do the best we can. And having that attitude toward others, not just the people on our immediate team, makes us a little more accepting, a little more open to the other people that we work with. That belief that we're all doing the best job we can, given what we know, yes, given our limited skills at the time, we're doing the best job that we can. And in fact, we start saying that in the retrospective. Well, don't you think they were probably doing the best job they could? It becomes a little mantra, a little part of the ritual, and then when you walk out of the retrospective, you carry a little bit of that with you. So that, to me, now is the power of the prime directive, is that it changes your brain.
Great. Well, and I really like the way you said it. It makes me think that if we have these inbuilt biases, we might as well learn how to exploit them for good as well as take the bad things that come along with them. So
yes,
kind of a life hack.
Yes, that's exactly right. So I have a little class now that I do on the cognitive biases and influence strategies, and I say that several times. You are stuck with this. There is absolutely nothing you can do about it, so you might as well exploit it. Think of ways that you can turn it around and use it to your own advantage. There is no way. They've done so much research on these things. They even have graduate students in psychology who certainly should know about the cognitive biases, and they can show them clearly that they are all biased. So if those people who are the pros, they can't overcome them, then what help is there for the rest of us, the ordinary guys who are just slogging through life trying to do the best we can? No hope at all. So we might as well just say, yeah, I'm stuck with it. I have this confirmation bias, and I recognize it in myself and others, and so we have to exploit it in the best way we can.
Great. So I just realized I've kept you for quite a while now, so I should probably let you go. But before we end the discussion, I wanted just to ask, is there anything important that we haven't gotten out in this conversation that people should know about retrospectives?
Yes, and that has to do with cognitive bias, which is that before I learned about the power of those biases, and in hanging around with a lot of people who do retrospectives, I believed more in the power of reflection than I do. And these biases should warn us that if we simply sit in isolation and let our own minds ruminate on what we've learned, whether it's at a personal level or at a team level, we're going to just get so hung up in all of the biased ways that we interpret the data that we see that we're really not going to make much progress. Our only hope is to get together with as many diverse others who see the world differently, that they can give us feedback on our own performance and on the performance of our teams that's so much more valuable than just sitting alone, making a little list, and trying to act on it. That is so hard to get past our own personal biases, that opening up and getting in a room with more diverse others is our only hope. That's our best hope.
Great. So we need to be open to discussion. We need to be open to other perspectives. And I think the most challenging thing that you said there is we need to be open to constructive criticism.
Yeah, or feedback. Maybe we can say. Now,
that's a better way.
You can tell me. How am I doing? And to seek that out and to do what you can to listen. There are lots of books on how to listen and how to be open and realize that we'll always have that struggle because we have our bias. There are several of them that say, we are great. We're very optimistic. We think we're better than we are at just about anything. And so we always have to struggle against that. For me, as somebody who's interested in patterns, it was a shock to think, well, I see patterns, but maybe I'm biased. Mm-hmm. So the only hope for patterns is to say, and what we've always said, is there must be 3 known uses, and it can't come from you. You can put that pattern on the table as a suggestion, but then you need to have 3 other people who say, yes, I agree, and here's my story. And it'll be a little bit different from your experience, but you should include that. And 3 other known uses will guarantee that this is not just your brain trying to make sense out of the world and incorporating all your cognitive biases and bringing in the diverse others who've had other experiences that validate yours. That's our only hope.
Great. Thanks again. I think this will be a really nice way of introducing that special issue.
Great. Thank you.